If we stop producing water, I think it would start impacting Kuwait within days.
What does this project actually do for Kuwait on a day-to-day basis?
If we have a failure on the power side, it impacts the water side because the process is linked. When we were here 10 years ago looking at, this project, no one at this end of the Gulf would touch reverse osmosis. The technology couldn't handle it.
There's always something that can go wrong.
It has happened, a major failure of one of our turbines.
Can any of these new changes in terms of policy affect the project?
It would take a radical shift in policy. And the one that we can't ignore is global warming, climate change, commitments to being carbon neutral.
What keeps you awake at night?
They're certainly not easy discussions. This is a 65% Kuwaiti-owned company. Mm-hmm. It must be controlled by Kuwaitis in the future.
Good afternoon. Thank you for tuning in. This is Christina. Welcome to a new episode of The Middle Ground, a space where we analyze the business landscape of Kuwait and of the wider region through the eyes of the people shaping it. As usual, I would like to start by thanking today's episode sponsor, Murad Yusuf Behbehani. Thank you so much for your support. As you all know, here we talk about interesting subjects that we believe everybody should know more about. And sometimes some of these projects that go on in Kuwait and outside are bigger than the companies operating them. Power, water, and other essential infrastructure projects bring together governments, international investors, local talent, and international expertise to bring about all of these projects that are so important for the future of the country. Some of them can take billions to finance, decades to operate, and a lot of effort to bring together. Shamal Az-Zour Al-Oula is one of these projects that has been up and running for a while. And today we want to understand a bit more about this project. How does it come together? What is its importance when we talk about local infrastructure? Why is this sort of project, a PPP project, taking over the responsibility that normally would have lied with the government, and so on? And who else can we talk to about this subject, if not somebody who has spent more than 30 years in this industry? Joining me today, we have Paul Floyd in the studio, CEO of Shamal Az-Zour Al-Oula company. Paul, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, Christina, thank you. It's very, very much a privilege to be here. Very humbled to have this opportunity to talk about our project, what it does for Kuwait, its history, its investors. Yeah, it's a real honor. Thank you.
I want to start with you a bit because I think most people don't know who you are. And I think we should change that. You are somebody who has spent over 3 decades working in this industry and supporting mega projects in power and water specifically. And I want to know what brought you to this industry and how did you reach the Middle East?
Oh, yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. Good questions. Passion for the power and water industry. I mean, I guess it's one of those things it's what I've done all my life. I've started, frankly, I started as an apprentice, mechanical apprentice. And I soon clicked to the idea in the industry that actually what we're doing is something really worthwhile. Energy, this wouldn't be happening without electricity.
Exactly.
At the middle of the night when you get up to go to the bathroom, you want to be able to switch on that light. And so it really started to resonate with me that this is something really worthwhile doing. And I think as a career, as a vocation, to be able to be part of that social service became very, very important. So that the track to the Middle East, I'm not quite sure how that actually happened. It's one of those, I don't think it was ever a planned move, but it just opportunities arise. And you look at opportunities and say, wow, what could this be? the opportunity originally come to Abu Dhabi with a large investment company from Japan who invested in power and water assets in the region. And really that was just the opening of the door to this wonderful journey in the Middle East. And involvement with those large projects, power and water. Yeah, it's been great.
And you started in Abu Dhabi.
Yes.
And then? Take us a bit through your journey in the Middle East.
Do you really want to know that? Because
at least in broad terms for us to know.
I've been doing laps of the Gulf. Abu Dhabi to Lebanon to Algeria to Kuwait, back to the Abu Dhabi, then to Saudi, then back to Abu Dhabi, then back to Kuwait. So it's I'm getting a little bit dizzy doing laps of the Gulf.
Where have you spent the most time from all of these countries that you just mentioned?
It's probably equally shared between the UAE and now Kuwait. This is my second time in Kuwait with the same project, wearing different hats. So, yeah, it's probably a little bit 50-50, the UAE and Kuwait. Yeah.
Yes. I will get back to that in a bit. But I want to ask you, for everybody who doesn't know your expertise, can you mention some of the projects that you have been working on in the region?
In the region, quite a number of the large power and water projects in the UAE, Abu Dhabi, Emirate in particular, the Kuwait projects in the south, Tuwila, which is a very, very large complex. I've worked on a couple of those projects, Tuwila B, Tuwila A2, in the Sharjah projects, and then, coming to here, Shamal Az-Zour has been the project of my time in Kuwait. Yep, so right across the region. Time in Lebanon, very interesting. Again, helping with the projects. The electricity infrastructure in Lebanon is critical. So
Yes.
Zerani in the south, Tripoli in the north, power and water projects again. Yep.
And out of all of these projects, because you named quite a lot of projects, and all of them sound not only critical, but also very interesting, right? As projects themselves, probably very different. But out of all of them, which ones do you feel shaped the most how you look at critical infrastructure today?
I think, well, there's two, and for very different reasons. My time in, did I mention Algeria? I spent it.
Yes.
Algeria was a very interesting project, a very large power and water plant. And the impact of that was because Algeria has quite a disconnected grid. So when we shut down, people's lights went out in the local villages, you know, so you really saw the impact of what you were doing and the criticality of it. The other one is the project near and dear to me is being here in Kuwait, because I was here right at the beginning of Shamal, right at the beginning. And now, I've worn different hats, seen it from different angles. It's helped shape me, and I hope I've done a little bit to help shape it along the way. So, yeah, very near and dear Kuwait.
I want us to stop here exactly at the Kuwait project, because I want to understand, first of all, why Shamal Az-Zour, and how did you end up in Kuwait? Where were you? Who called you? What happened?
I was actually in Algeria at the time, and I was due to finish my contract there. I got a call from an engineering consultancy, management consultancy. They'd secured a contract with the Ministry of Electricity and Water to help set up the original public sector private projects department within the ministry.
Yes. That
department was being set up to build Shamal Az-Zour. It was because Shamal Az-Zour was the first independent PPP project, power and water project, done under the PPP model. So this was all new and exciting for Kuwait in terms of, and they needed a little bit of support to help them get them through that. People who had experience with the PPP model. Mm-hmm. So we were seconded into, from this consultancy, seconded into the ministry to basically help handhold them through this, radical change in the way that Kuwait was securing investment, securing new projects, new power and water projects. Tremendously exciting opportunity.
Was this in response to a need the country was having at the moment, or was it more anticipating what the country would end up needing in the future?
A little bit of both, but because suddenly, change in law, change in the way the government was choosing to procure and develop major projects. That was when CAP, Kuwait Authority for Public Private Projects, was established. So there was all new legislation enabling this to happen. So there was an immediate need. The country had decided, we want to go into a PPP model. We want to build a new power and water plant under this model, but very much setting up that capability within the ministry. So for the future phases of Az-Zour North, for the future projects that would be built in Kuwait. So a little bit of immediate need, a little bit of forward thinking. Yep.
For somebody who has been 30 years doing this, what made this project particularly interesting for you?
I think just the newness of it, being there right from not just building, not just the nuts and bolts and the turbines and things like that, but this whole, we're doing something new, we're doing something groundbreaking for Kuwait in terms of building not only just a power plant for Kuwait, but building a model for which Kuwait would actually establish and build future projects. Yeah, very, very amazing opportunity.
And you mentioned that you came on this project and you had a more technical role, if I understand correctly, and then you left. What made you leave, and how did you come back? Who made that phone call?
No, my first time in Kuwait was with the ministry, supporting them with the private sector projects department establishment. That was a fixed term. I was seconded for 3 years. Mm-hmm. That came to an end. We'd achieved financial close. We'd achieved project commercial operation. So in some ways, the job was done. In terms of that establishment. I then went back to the UAE, and eventually I wound up working for Sumitomo Corporation, who was one of the key investors in the Shamal project. Mm-hmm. And I was working in a head office role, and then there was an opportunity to get involved with Shamal again. And I said, well, yeah, I know a bit about that project.
Yes.
Yeah. So at that stage, then I joined the board of the operating company, who Sumitomo are a part owner in as well. So then I got to see a different phase of the project, looking at it from the operator's point of view. So then I was with Sumitomo for a while. Then it became the opportunity. My predecessor decided to move on, and so I said, look, hey, I'd be keen to be CEO of this project. I know a little bit about it. So again, I wind up doing, I guess, almost a third facet of looking at this project. So I've looked at it from the off-taker's point of view, the people who the contract with. I've looked at it from the operator's point of view. And now, I've had the privilege to be in the owner's seat as well. So it's like I say,
to understand their perspectives also.
Different. And so the upside for me is tremendous, opportunity to look at a project for so many different dimensions, but also bringing to that project that I can bring different dimensions of how we look at the project. I've got empathy for the operator. I've got empathy for the off-taker. So it's been a tremendous privilege for me, this project.
During these shifts of looking at the project from different angles, was there any specific point where you felt, okay, this is really something we need to pay attention to? When you went, from looking at it from a lens or another, did you ever stop and say, hey, wait a second, I think we need to reconsider a bit how we look at this?
I think there's been challenges along the way, because when you're sitting in a particular seat, you look at things with, through that lens.
A bit of a bias.
yeah, a bit of a bias. So, the operating company has, just to explain, we have the owner company is actually a very small company. There's only 14 of us, but we own the asset. We're the asset manager. We have all the loans. We have the big contracts, but we subcontract the operations and maintenance of the plant to another company, which is owned by our shareholders as well. But each has its own entity, each has its own identity, each is a commercially separate organisation. So each has its own drivers to be successful. So sometimes there's a little bit of tension in that, and yeah, it's a good healthy tension. It keeps everyone honest, keeps everyone focused. But there's times when we're going,
I have a lot of questions on that. I will get back to that later. But we're talking about this project, and I really want people to understand a bit more about that. It is, at the end of the day, a landmark project for Kuwait. And I'm looking at what's happening today, and as you know, I'm reading for transparency purposes. Today, Az-Zour North 1 has the capacity to generate more than 1,500 megawatts of electricity and 107 million gallons of water every day, representing around 10% of Kuwait installed power capacity and 20% of its installed water capacity. And now I want us to explain what this means to all of our viewers in practical terms. What does this project actually do for Kuwait on a day-to-day basis?
On a day-to-day basis, it means your lights come on, your air conditioning comes on. If we, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be overly dramatic about it, but if we shut down, there'll have to be what they call load shedding, which means they turn the lights off to parts of the city, parts of the country. We won't run out of water overnight, but it becomes critical. I mean, we have the fortune. Kuwait and the Gulf region has the fortune that it is connected, from an electrical sense. We have a wire that comes across from Saudi, but that's only can carry so much capacity. So we are saved a little bit there. But when the water stops, things really stop. So it's, again, for your viewers, the reality is, when you have an expectation that you're going to get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom and be able to flick on the light, and it happens.
But you mentioned that, especially from a water perspective, we would feel it, right? If anything should happen, just hypothetically, to the installation that you have right now, to the water plant, we would eventually feel it. Now, I want to ask you, for us to understand the scale, how soon do you think we would feel the impact, and how fast do you think rebuilding such a facility or, fixing it would take? How long it would take for the country to fix somehow the issue?
Well, two parts, Christina. I think the first thing is, if we stop producing water, I think it would start impacting Kuwait within days. Because there is a certain reserve. it's always critical, if we talk about worst case scenarios of major failures or major damage given the current climate, it's very much dependent on how bad the damage is. But what we do see and what we have seen is when damage does happen to critical infrastructure, there is a tremendous will, particularly with the support of the Ministry of Electricity, to get behind and mobilise resources. Even though we're a private entity, we have confidence that if things get bad, they will help us because it's in the country's best interest.
Yes. Yes. So it would take a while for them to fix this issue.
Yeah. It would be, if we were suddenly disabled, you would be receiving messages, conserve power, turn your air conditioning off, conserve water, those sorts of things. It is a real-time impact, yep.
And we say that this is one of the pioneering PPP projects here in Kuwait, and the PPP project, a private-public partnership, basically. What makes this business model, relevant in Kuwait?
I think you put it in the context of what's happened across the Gulf, and I think it started particularly with Abu Dhabi and the UAE, where they moved from government entities to the private model, and the model that we use or have used here in Kuwait is the same PPP model that was established in the UAE, and is pretty much proliferated right across the Gulf. It's the model of private investment and coupled with government investment. It's the model of providing capacity to the market, not just volume. It's been secured by a commercially more transparent model. So people are rightly saying, where's my dollar being spent in terms of the investment in the country. So there is a raft of benefits, and it started in the UAE, and so it's a very logical and sensible way. It was the logical and sensible model for Kuwait to pick up. So a proven and tested model, yeah.
So we could say basically that this sort of model ensures somehow that we're privatizing some of the industries, but at the same time retaining somehow control over the critical, essential infrastructure of the country to the government.
Yeah, and I think it's I think the slight difference is that when we look at perhaps the UAE and Oman, and Saudi's a little bit different, but UAE and Oman, the government has, through its organisations, retained control through retaining its stake. The difference here in Kuwait is that the government essentially, we floated the company so that the Kuwaiti citizens could invest in this company as well. So I think that's the only difference. But it's essentially the local, the rule of thumb: 60% local interest, 40% foreign shareholding. It's the same split everywhere you go. Yeah.
But looking at these projects in general, right? When you look at these mega projects, we know that they sometimes can face delays, cost overruns, and several other complications. And I want us to both look together at this specific project that you have been working so fondly on. Help us understand what went wrong with this project. Where did you feel that it was maybe not wrong, but difficult? What was the most difficult part of this project? But also what you feel that went tremendously well?
Oh, I think start with the positive. What went tremendously well is that it is very rare for a mega project to come in on time and close to budget. And Shamal was on time, which is, if you're on time, then the cost factor follows. You have cost success as well in terms of the project investment. So that's a rare achievement, a great achievement. So an absolute positive. Where things, it's actually hard to say that there's things that have not gone well.
I mean, maybe I didn't position it right.
No.
Where do you feel that you face more complications, let's say, or where you felt that it was harder to make a decision during the project, or where did you feel that you had to sit a bit before making a decision based on, technicalities of the project, or sometimes even conditions that, have to do with the country's regulations or policies?
Yeah, I think that's a time-bound perspective, because because it was all, this was a brave new world for Kuwait in terms of the PPP model for a power project. So there was a lot of teething problems, a lot of people getting used to the idea of that the ministry didn't have hands-on. They were we were on a contractual footing, not a hands-on footing. So people having to pull back from what their traditional roles or influences were, understanding the contract, that we have a big contract with some big overseas players, and there's a lot of money involved. Just that but they were teething problems. I think there's a lot of maturity has developed now. I mean, we've got, phase 2 is literally being built. And I know, because we work closely with them, they're literally our neighbour, but we have the same investor as well. So we work very closely, and we know that they haven't had those same teething problems. So the maturity has come.
I was going to ask you exactly that. If you feel that now in the second phase, these hurdles that you faced initially, let's say, have been resolved, and that people now understood how these projects come about.
Yeah, certainly. I think it's not I use the example of the first invoice that Shamal generated when it first started. People were going, "Oh my God, look at this bill. This is so expensive." But they didn't understand that it was paying off the investment, because people needed to get to grips with the model, the money flow, instead of the government, spending literally lots and lots of money out of its pocket. It was just paying for it in a different way.
Yes.
And so people have got to grips with that concept. They've come to, there's, government agencies have come to grips with and have matured tremendously in working in this new environment. Well, new environment's 10 years old now, but so we certainly see that the maturity has developed in terms of a lot of the difficulties, just challenges people had getting their head around this is a different way of working. Yep.
Exactly. You mentioned something now, and I want us to dive a bit deeper into that. We know that part of the model requires international capital, like you just mentioned, but also expertise. And I want us to go beyond the buzzwords of all of these projects. Help us understand, Paul, beyond the financial implications, right, and the investment. What do international companies really bring to these markets?
Well, I think at face value, it's capital. It's investing in Kuwait. It's being prepared to invest their dollar in Kuwait. So, bottom line, a lot of, the capital is a big driver. It means the country isn't having to find that money for itself. I think it's also with those international investors, it's their access to the capital markets to be able to get good prices for debt. And so they're experienced in doing that. It's the experience they bring that, this is, Shamal wasn't their first project. They had skin in the game. They knew who to talk to, how to get loans, who to get the best value.
This is exactly what I want to touch with you, because I would like us to have a short list of things that we can actually think about when we talk about that, because of course, the overall umbrella is expertise. We're bringing expertise and knowledge. What does that actually translate into? As you mentioned now, and I think it's great, you talk about a network of connections that sometimes secure financing, maybe raw materials, I don't know, cost advantages of any kind. Can you give us a short list of some of the things that you feel international companies are able to bring at least at the scale, if not necessarily as something new?
Well, as we were talking, access to capital, access to, the other financial institutions, the banks, they have experience in making and doing those deals. Access to good, the capital markets and best price of debt. That's also, as the large investors, again, Shamal wasn't their first project, so they can go to the equipment suppliers and say, we have a relationship. We've built a few of these projects. We're going to keep building a few. You're going to do us a good deal, right?
Okay.
Yeah. And so that leverage that they bring with equipment suppliers, because they have the history. And they have the people who are used to having those conversations as well.
Do you feel it's hard to organize such projects, talking about, the expertise and everything? Because from what you just mentioned, there's so many areas involved. Is it hard to organize from a legal perspective? Considering all the intricacies, it's partly government, partly private sector. It could be an investor from here and, local players, but then at the end of the day, it is a listed company. So you have also shareholders. Does it look complicated for an international company, or is this part of the learning curve of companies who operate in different markets?
It is complex because, exactly like you said, Christina, the web of relationships between banks, lenders, insurers, risk management, it is a complex web, and it's very, very contractual. There's a web of contracts that all relate to each other. So we spent a lot of time with lawyers as well.
Yes.
So there is a complexity, but the paradox is because it's a known way of doing business, although looking in from the outside, it looks complex, but it's a model that works. And that's, again, going back to the overseas investors. They've done this. They know how to do this. And that's no disrespect to the people or the institutions in Kuwait. That maturity is coming. We see we have local banks investing in our project. We have local banks investing in phase 2. And there's a growing interest in the local banks being involved, because there is a maturity of understanding the whole project financing, large scale debt.
So, do you feel that such projects end up slowly incentivizing also other parts of the economy? As you said, bringing in more local actors, more support towards these projects, and slowly involving more local actors into these projects.
Yeah, and I don't, and couldn't comment on the arrangements of phase 2, but I know when I look at what's happening in the UAE market, the increasing presence of particularly at the contractual front end, saying that so much of the investment in this project must be allocated to local banks. I really don't know the details but I know there's a greater appetite from local banks to be involved. And there's also the push from the developer, the government side, to get them involved and sort of actually mandating, we must have so much percentage local investment. It's good. So it's a bit of push and pull on that one.
I want to dive a bit deeper into this, because part of what these contracts usually mention is the aspect of knowledge transfer, right? And I want to ask you, how do we ensure that actually happens and is not just something written in a contract? How do we ensure this knowledge transfer?
Well, I think it starts at a very simple, at a very, very critical point, is that we are obliged to have 70% Q80 headcount. So we bring the Q80s into the company when it's mandated that that's our local content. But not just that. I mean, it's not just having the head or the bodies. They must have the same percentage of salary in terms of 70%. If we have 70% QOTization, 70% of our payroll. So you can't just hire bodies and park them somewhere. They've got to be real positions, doing real work, being rewarded appropriately. So that's a tremendous driver, at the coalface to bring, nationals in, get them involved, give them meaningful positions, grow them.
And do you think these people could in the future, of course, after some years of experience, operate themselves such facilities or run these projects themselves?
Absolutely. And I think there's an obligation, and it's an obligation I feel, is to develop the Q80s, without going into the complexity of it. I'm nominated to the position by one of the foreign shareholders, but this is a 65% Q80 owned company. It must be controlled by Q80s in the future. So my commitment and my obligation to the foreign shareholder that nominated me to secure their long-term interests in the well-being of this project, I have a very, very big obligation to make sure that this project is left in good hands when I leave, and that there's a capable Q80 team that we pass the baton to.
You've touched at such an important point. And it's exactly where I wanted to go, because we know these projects, these partnerships are usually built for a very long time, right? We can talk 30, 40, even 50 years.
Yeah.
And I want us to understand a bit what happens as these projects evolve. What happens when a project like this comes to an end, right? Along the way, we know shareholders can change, and a lot of the necessities of the project can change as well. What can you tell us about that? How do these projects evolve?
Well, they do involve, and I mean, there's, we have a contract that has a term. Shamal is very, very fortunate that typically what they call a power and water purchase agreement between the ministry, the off-taker, the government, and the developer is typically 20 to 25 years.
Okay.
We have a 40-year contract. That was, so we have a much longer commitment to Kuwait. But the concept around the 25 years is that it's very much an investment. 25 years gives an opportunity to pay off the debt. The investors use debt to finance the way into the project. You need 25 years to pay that back and get a return on the project. It's a long game.
But I want to understand, can any factors come along the way and influence negatively the project? Let's say maybe change in ownership, maybe change in shareholders, the fact that we keep trading shares.
Yeah.
Can anything along the way affect more substantially, let's say, the project, or could be a question mark?
I think there's some big global questions around that. I think one of the things that makes these projects attractive, and one of the things that makes Shamal attractive and for future investors coming into Kuwait, is that we have a very, very stable revenue stream for Kuwait. It's financially secure. So if I'm an foreign investor, am I going to invest in Kuwait? The first thing I want to know is that my bill is going to get paid,
Yes.
that the invoices are going to be paid. When you have a secure off-taker in terms of the government, that is a tremendous incentive to invest. So, if you were to get really worried, the biggest threat is a government collapse, the government's inability to pay its bills. But we know in such a secure environment, there's always going to be risk.
But this is, I'm curious just to understand something. Is this something that we know can potentially happen, or has it actually happened in the history of PPP projects globally? Have there been such scenarios that you know of?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, it's probably, it may have happened, some nationalisation of assets and things like that, but that only happens in very unstable countries and unstable and economically unstable situations. I think, yeah.
But basically we could conclude from this that there are certain factors, including political stability, even like it's happening now, regional tensions, God forbid, if they would escalate or anything, they could affect how these projects are ran, let's say, for all of this period of time. Is this why it's important also to have this longer term contracts, let's say, for unforeseen situations where, let's say, an experienced investor and an experienced operator would handle such difficult situations much better?
Yeah, I think where I draw the parallel is that when we bid on a project, the thing that determines who wins, and people might say, oh, it's a little bit more complex than that, Paul, but it comes down to this, what's called the levelized cost of electricity. So I work out how much I'm going to charge over the life of this project, and put that in an envelope and give it to the government who's running the tender, and they take it out and say, Paul's bid for the life of this project is such and such, and it's compared to others. So that levelized cost contemplates 25 years or the term, or in our case, 40 years. So when you're working out what that number is, that levelized cost, you're going to take into it the ups and downs. You do some forecasting on fuel, you do some forecasting on, there's always going to be, your lenders are going to go, what's the political risk? There are factors like that. I mean,
for example, like we know in Kuwait that there were changes 2 years ago. We had the parliament put on hold for a while. That could change in a matter of 2 years, let's say, or if, I don't know, at some point we have new leadership or, new forces, let's say, interfering, that could potentially also change the course of the project.
It's a little bit hard to change the course of a project once it's locked in. You need catastrophic circumstances, and you could argue that recently we've been in those. If the government, and please forgive my oversimplification of it, but if Kuwait, with the straits being closed, if Kuwait can't sell its oil, if it can't get revenue, then it can't pay its bills, so it can't pay us. That's a very, very oversimplified analogy, but it's only if the government gets into a situation where it can't pay its bills.
We know that's not the case in Kuwait.
No, and so that's...
But it's good to put these things there so we know what potential risks are. Are these sort of assessments part of the let's say, initial feasibility studies around the project, or?
Absolutely. I mean, and that all comes down into a lot of it is when you're thinking about a project like this, your investment decision comes down to, a lot of it comes down to, am I going to win this project? One of the things that's is a key determinant is the cost of debt. So when we go to the debt market, they're a lot smarter than what we are in assessing political stability in terms of government stability, regional things like that. And so they factor that into the interest rate that they charge you for the money that you want to borrow. It's their risk management.
Exactly.
And so that can either win or lose a project for you. If the debt market says too much risk, the government's unstable, which I'm not saying that is, but that, for instance, if they're looking at other countries that are less stable, if they go regional tension is too high, to manage our risk, we're going to charge you double-digit interest rates. Well, you're not going to win the project, and you're going to be warned off very, very quickly.
Yes.
So, in some ways, the risk decision is often driven by the risk associated with capital.
لو سألتونا من هو مراد يوسف بهبهاني بنقول لكم قصة ثقة، مو هو مجرد اسم. الموضوع مو بس منتج ينشر وينباع، وهو ذوق وإحساس نشعره وياكم بدون ما تتكلمون. من سيارة تعكس هيبتك إلى ساعة ومجوهرات تتكلم عن أناقتك، حتى بالسفر بنكون معاك بكل رحلة وذكرى. ما هي صدفة أن أجيال كاملة اعتمدت علينا. هذه علاقة انبتت على الأصالة والثقة. كل تفاصيل يومك من اسم واحد، مراد يوسف بهبهاني.
Okay, but I want us to understand something. It's been 40 years and you finished your mission. You're probably long gone from Kuwait, enjoying retirement somewhere else. What happens to this project? What happens to the assets? Do you just walk away? You close the company? Do the assets go back belonging to the government? What happens to the people?
Yeah, all of those things are potential outcomes. I mean, our contract is that at the end of the contract, we return the assets to the off-taker, the ministry. So at 40 years, we walk away. We've paid our bills. We've covered our debt. We've made some profit, but it's a clean slate at that point in time. So we hand and we have to hand back the assets in good working condition. We can't just trash them and then run away.
So you're kind of giving back a turnkey project, right? It's ready-made. Are you supposed to also, let's say, nominate the new management, let's say, of the company to ensure that continuity once you really pack your bags and go?
No, that's that then becomes the ministries. I'll use a bit of jargon here, and this is the common model. It's called BOOT: build, own, operate, transfer. So we are in a BOOT contract. So at the end of the contract, we transfer the assets back. They have to be with due wear and tear for the age. We don't hand back a brand new shiny plant. We've had fair wear and tear, fair use of it. But at the end of the contract, we hand that back to the ministry. The people, that is very much becomes a decision. We look at what's happened in the UAE. There's been a number of plants there. One has, it came to the end of its power purchase agreement. They shut it down and are dismantling it.
Why?
Because it had reached the end of its economic life. The cost of refurbishment, it's easier just to actually tip it into a hole and start again.
Okay.
Whereas there's other, again, the UAE, we look, and Oman is the same. A lot of older plants are reaching the end of their life. They're going into power purchase agreement extensions. It's very much an economic decision, which is often refurbishment cost versus start again.
This is actually very interesting, and I never thought about it. So these assets are not for life.
No.
So what's the average, let's say, lifespan of such an asset?
Well, it's driven by the contract, which is, from an engineering point of view, we design for 25 years because that's the life of the contract. We expect the equipment to last, with due maintenance, with due refurbishment. We design the plant to last 25 years because that matches the contract. If we build it to last longer, we've overinvested. If we don't build it to last 25 years, we're going to be required to reinvest at the back end of the project. So there has to be a synergy between the physical life of the assets and the contractual life. So it's always the life of the contract determines everything.
So basically, from the onset, when we're creating the schematics, let's say, of this project, we can decide how long we want to have this asset in the country.
Yeah, absolutely.
So construction happens based on that decision.
It happens. It's the whole alignment of
because I was expecting when you're designing such a facility, you go for the technical details, what it's necessary for it to function at full capacity, right? Based on, let's say, the output that you're looking at.
Yeah.
But basically what you're saying is that's not the only reasoning behind it.
It has to be time framed.
Okay.
It has to be. So I need a turbine with naturally having appropriate overhauls. I need a turbine. I buy a turbine that I know is going to last me for the same number of years that my contract is. And I design my steel infrastructure, how long pieces of equipment are going to run before they, so if, it starts with the tender process. The government or the off-taker goes to the market and says, I need a new power project. I want you to bid on it, and it will go out to various organisations who bid on these projects and say who wants to invest, the term of the project, and the government will set the term of the project. It will say we're offering a 25-year, a 20-year, or a 10-year contract. So then I go, okay. If I want to bid on this, I go to my equipment manufacturers, my construction people, and say, I need to pay this project back over 25 years. I need it to last 25 years. I don't want to overbuild it. I don't want to underbuild it. So we get that alignment between the technical and the financial. But it's always driven. It starts with the government saying, I want a project. I'm offering a 25-year contract.
And this is what I wanted to ask you, going back to my question. The moment you finish your contractual obligations and this asset goes back to the government, is it the project that's still viable for the government if it reached its lifespan on paper at least?
Yeah.
Is it still useful for the government, or will they have to rebid and start from scratch? It becomes an investment decision, and it comes down to, is it cheaper to refurbish this plant, spend a lot of money refurbishing the plant to get another 10 years out of it? Or is it, actually, technology's advanced, machines are more efficient, the economics are, it's easier just to tip it into a hole and start again. There's a lot of economic evaluation at that point in time. And like I say, it's when we look at the UAE and Oman, it's gone either way. They've said it's cheaper to start again. They've said,
On other plants, it's cheaper to refurbish and get, a life extension.
I'm no expert when it comes to technology in this field, but I know that you know a bit about that. And I want to ask you, given the pace of technological development in these sectors specifically, would it make sense for the government to award projects that go beyond 4 decades?
I think there's, I think you touch a very good point, Christina, is that, there are technology limits at this point in time. There's a lot of conventional wisdom and a lot of conventional knowledge that says, I know that I can get so many refurbishment cycles out of a gas turbine, and that's going to last me 20 years. After that, they become scrap. But that's bounded by the technical limits, the technology that we have, and that's changing all the time, advancing all the time. But there is we are constrained by technical limits at this point in time.
This is what I wanted to say, because I think these projects are long-term, but at the same time, technology keeps evolving at an unprecedented pace.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that although it's not as easy to come with something, much of a breakthrough, let's say, they're saying now that the pace of innovation is slower, but the impact is much higher. And I'm thinking, because we keep going to the nitty-gritty details of everything.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking now, maybe halfway into your project, there will be new technologies that might make your project look inefficient. Could that be a possibility?
Yeah, I mean, there's always that there is that opportunity exists now. Our technology, speaking very plainly, is 10 years old. We've got 10 years of advance on. We've got turbine components that last longer, need less maintenance cycles, make the machine more efficient. So they become an investment decision. We could do those upgrades now, but it becomes, is there the business case to do it?
Is this something you can address with, let's say, local authorities or let's say the public sector side of the project? Let's say you're 10 years into the project and some major breakthrough happens and there's new technology, and you feel if we were able to implement, at least in parts of the project, this technology, the output would be better and the project would be more viable, but that would require extra investment for us, which means that we would need to amend the contract.
Yep.
Is this a possibility?
It is a possibility. It is always a possibility. And it's a very big job, because you've got to, first of all, you're in a tripartite situation. You've got lenders, developer, off-taker. So we've got to get everyone lined up on the business case. And the negotiations, the contractual negotiations that go on with that. Certainly not impossible, but complex. It's the same thing too. If we saw a massive opportunity in terms of an efficiency gain or a maintenance cycle gain, we on our own business case can say we don't need to worry about discussing it with the off-taker.
Okay.
But there's a business case that we will make this investment. The project will be more efficient. We'll make more money out of it. And then, so we've got a business case to then go to our lenders. The same thing too is that, the other scenario, we can go and say there's a tremendous technology advance. We can go to the ministry and say, we can implement a technology change, but we're going to have to invest to do it. You're going to get more capacity out of it, which is always the big issue. You're going to get better efficiency, which means it's a more economical project for them to run. So if we can do something like that and say, we can do this investment, but we need to talk about the tariff and our contract, they're always always possible discussions. Yeah, absolutely.
So the projects are not set in stone, basically. This is what I wanted to know. If you agree on something in the beginning, now whatever happens, you just have to deliver and that's it. So these are flexible terms. You can still go back and renegotiate things.
Yeah, I mean, negotiation is endlessly possible.
If it makes sense from a business perspective.
If it makes sense, if there's a business case to the ministry for, if we can enhance our output, which means them not having to build extra capacity, and there's an economic benefit for them to do it, then we will have a sensible discussion. If there's an opportunity for us to say we're not going to impact on the ministry, but we can get an efficiency gain, we can go to our lenders and say, we need a little bit more money, and this is the payback. They're certainly not easy discussions, but there is the opportunity to have, as long as it's a sensible discussion. Yeah.
Wonderful. I want us to be a bit technical, because we're talking here about your project, and you mentioned something that is very important. You have to hand over at the end a project that is working.
Yeah. And
we want to know more about the workings inside Az-Zour, because we know that you're handling both power generation, but also water desalination. How do these things work together inside the project?
Well, it's a synergistic, if there's such a word, relationship, is that basically we burn gas to make electricity in the turbines. The turbines have hot exhaust gas. We use that hot exhaust gas, first of all, to make more electricity in steam turbines, but we also use that heat that we generate, make steam for the distillation process, which is the water side of the business. So, they're inextricably linked technically in this design of plant. Just jumping back to what do we hand over at the end, it's all very contractually bound that we have performance standards, levels of performance of the plant, technical performance that we must meet as part of the handover. We can't just hand over junk. It's all locked into the contract. Very specifically what we must hand back in terms of its not only physical assets, but in terms of the performance of the assets. Yeah.
And there's no sort of problem to have these two elements combined in one project.
In terms of the power and water, or
yes. I mean, there's no technical glitches there.
No, not this. But again, what we're seeing is an evolution of technology. We have like I say, our process is inextricably linked because that's the design of the plant. What we're seeing, a big move, is we distill water. We take seawater and distill it using heat to get clean water. There's an alternate process called reverse osmosis, which is basically ultrafiltration. And so there isn't the same, they're not technically linked, apart from the fact that reverse osmosis needs electricity to drive the pumps to push the water through the filters, but they're not dependent. That's where we, if we have a failure on the power side, it impacts the water side because the process is linked. If you have using the new technology of reverse osmosis, if the water side needs to shut down, it doesn't stop the power side generating, and vice versa. And so there is a greater shift in technology towards reverse osmosis. For instance, I can talk about when we were here 10 years ago looking at, this project. No one at this end of the Gulf would touch reverse osmosis because of the salinity and the turbidity, the cloudiness of the water was just all too hard because reverse osmosis, just the technology couldn't handle it. Absolutely not now. It's the technology's there. So there's a shift in the technical side of the way that projects are conceived in terms of the technology that can and will be used.
Okay. I'm interested to ask you something. These large projects, there's always something that can go wrong. You can produce a lot of energy. I'm just, thinking with you. You can produce a lot of energy, but then we have an old electricity grid that cannot support. So many issues that can happen. Paul, I want you to be honest with me. What keeps you awake at night?
From a technology point of view, there's always those, this machinery, it does break down. We have 98% availability. 98% of the time our plant runs, we have maintenance included in that last 2%. So we factor that in. But we also have an allowance for unplanned events, and these do happen. So when 98% hand on heart that the lights will stay on, but there's always that 2%. And it's machinery. Unfortunately, this is we can't make it foolproof, breakdown proof. All we can do is maintain it the best we can, look after it, nurture it, invest in it when we need to.
Give me an example of a worrisome, unforeseen event. What would be a scenario that...
Well, and it has happened. A major failure of one of our turbines might mean that capacity can be unavailable for 6 months. If you have a serious malfunction, that's the order of magnitude of time it can take to fix these things.
And you mentioned that if we would stop certain activities, we would feel it relatively soon.
Yeah, relatively soon. I mean, it's the fortunate thing is that we have 7 turbines, we have 10 water distillers. So for all of them to stop all at once would be, I think the world would be a very bad place to be living in at the time.
Exactly. But tell me, after working on so many projects in all of these countries, what differentiates an asset that performs well after 25 years from one that breaks within 10 years?
A lot of it's your upfront decisions, the quality of equipment that you buy at the front end, and that's where it's very short-sighted to buy, speaking specifically, buy a cheap turbine to win. So your capital bid is low, so your bid price is low, but you're going to pay. You're going to pay because you won't get the life out of it. So it's always that balancing up. I need to make sure that I invest properly in good quality equipment that will last the term of the project. It's very, very self-defeating to buy cheap and cheerful. Yeah.
You mentioned at the beginning of the interview how your perspective has changed when you started moving seats in the project. And when we talk about these mega infrastructure projects, we know that a lot of the greatness, but also about the complications of these projects can be underestimated. And that can come from an operational perspective, from the government side, even from investors, policymakers. If you had to think of top 3 things that are misunderstood in general about these large infrastructure projects, or aspects that go underestimated in general, or they tend to be oversimplified, what would you say are the first 3 most important?
I think the regulatory environment is such a critical success factor, not only because we want stability for the life of the project, but we want an environment that is conducive to overseas investment. We're not saying favoritism, but clarity, transparency, stability. The regulatory environment is probably the biggest determinant. I mean, like I say, going back to what I was talking about earlier, that's stuff that the lenders take note of. They decide, the regulatory environment is good, so they factor that into their risk allocation to their cost of debt. Regulatory environment is the first thing. The second thing is I really struggled to get past the first one.
But I will go back to the first one because I feel that we can still add something there.
Yeah.
Let's say, again, we're talking at a long lifespan of these projects.
Yeah.
Could any decision that the government makes, let's say in 10 years from now, God knows, new, as we said earlier, potentially, hypothetically, new leadership, new forms of organization within the country. We could have the parliament back or no, we don't know yet. Can any of these new changes in terms of policy affect the project, or usually the project is secured by the initial contract that it had with the government?
An existing project is very well protected. It would take a radical shift in policy, for instance, and the one that we can't ignore is global warming, climate change. When we look at commitments to various governments' commitments to being carbon neutral. That has caused, not so much at the government level, but the investors have said, as a large corporate, as a large entity, we will commit to climate change. We will commit to 2050, 2040 as being, and that the trickle down of then that affects, will we invest in another fossil fuel project? And the same thing happens, if the government were to have a sudden lurch in policy driven by a commitment or to a radical shift in becoming carbon neutral, very, very little impact on existing projects, how that might be perceived in terms of other investors coming into the country. Who knows? Yeah.
Let's continue this line of being forward-looking, let's say. Yeah. You've been traveling around the world, and you're somebody who I'm sure stays updated with all of these informations related to new technologies and such. When you travel around the world, at what point do you go looking at Kuwait or the region more broadly, this is a project that's going to be important for the future? Do you see around the world projects that you feel would be a good fit here in Kuwait?
Yeah, definitely. I think, I think we can't dodge the question that Kuwait is on the edge in terms of its ability to make and produce power, its ability to make and produce water, and in terms of growth, in terms of demand. That's sort of like the supply demand curve is reaching its nexus. It's critical for Kuwait to invest if it wants to keep growing as a country, even to stay where it is.
I mean, especially now, I'm making a bracket here. We were having so many discussions, even with guests earlier, that now, especially with all the data centers coming all around the world, these are eating massive amounts of power.
Yes. Yes.
And then we continue manufacturing and having more companies who keep manufacturing things, and we keep the industry of fast moving consumer goods keeps expanding. So this means only more power needs, let's say, and increasing power needs.
Because the things that you touch on are very much part of that, the social contract.
But do you see here in Kuwait, we have currently some facilities, right? We have power generation, we have water plants, we have recycling facilities like we explored in some of our previous episodes. Do you see around the world now something that you think would be critical in the future for Kuwait?
I think... and purely this is just my perception, I think the opportunity for waste to energy, we see the rise, particularly I often reference the UAE, but other Gulf states as well, Bahrain, the increasing interest in waste to energy, responsible, we can't just keep tipping it in a hole. There's the whole, and this is where the population, globally, is becoming more aware. There's people are saying, are we disposing of waste responsibly? Are we? We can't just keep tipping it into a hole.
We have all seen these videos circulating on social media of waste being dumped directly into rivers and sometimes thrown out of buses or trains Yes.
And it was actually an interesting one because I was involved in a waste to energy plant and my initial skepticism is, we're burning stuff, we're making more CO2. But it's a very interesting dynamic that what happens is that if you bury the waste, it decomposes, it makes methane. The methane is a far worse greenhouse gas than CO2. So you can say, well, it's the lesser of two evils.
But don't we have now technology, for example, for carbon capture? Or I mean, couldn't these be technologies incorporated in new projects and ensure that we also keep that green side of a project like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's still a long way to go on carbon capture, but it's not just a theory anymore. It is. If you look at the technology life cycle in academic terms, it's not just a theoretical concept. It's an embryonic technology moving into commercialized. It's commercialized. It's becoming reality. But I think, going back to your question, a project that would be good for Kuwait, I think there is a near and pressing need purely for energy in terms of electricity and water. But if you look at technology, infrastructure, waste to energy is a good thing to be looking at.
I know that I'm asking this because I know a lot of the technology that we might be overlooking now, it could become essential in 10 to 20 years based on, adoption and new uses. And that's what I wanted to link this question with, because I'm thinking about the future of Kuwait. Do you see anything else outside of waste to energy projects that could really, that the country could be benefiting from?
Yeah, Kuwait is quite unique in terms of its dependence on the oil sector and oil revenue. How far you can diversify from that is not an easy question.
Do you feel that Kuwait needs any support, let's say, around these projects? And the first example that comes to mind is the one I made earlier. Maybe we're producing a lot of energy, but the local energy grid is old and doesn't support that properly. If you were to make a recommendation, let's say, as somebody who's worked on these projects, but also understands Kuwait much better after all these years in the country, what do you feel would be some of the most important elements where Kuwait should be looking at, or, making an improvement in the upcoming period to support such projects?
I think it's one of the things is it's bigger than Kuwait. I think, just purely from an electricity and an energy perspective, we have what's called the GCC interconnector, the Gulf, states all are connected by an electricity network. There is work at the moment going on to increase Kuwait's access to that in terms of the amount of electricity it can import. But I think just that wider coordination across the Gulf states in terms of using that grid interconnector so that Kuwait can optimize its electricity production. Other states that are further ahead are producing more. There's an opportunity. So I think Kuwait really getting on board with the role of the GCC interconnector. And this is purely in a personal opinion. Yeah.
I'm gonna expand a bit on the question because I had the pleasure of meeting the country manager of Iberdrola in Qatar 2 years back. And this is what we were discussing, right? They're producing the green energy and, they're using solar and other means to produce green energy. But what they were saying as an example is that green energy is unstable. You don't have this steady flow of energy. So you can have a lot of energy being produced at a specific moment during the day or during the week, but then it can decrease dramatically. And then they were explaining that they were building the technology to support these changes, these variations, but they were also saying that such technologies need to be integrated with the grid, and that sometimes the grid of that country doesn't really support properly such technologies. And then the discussion becomes much wider, right? So they were just giving me an example of the complexities of the project. And this is why I keep going back to this, but I don't know other examples. So that's why I was asking you if you feel that maybe the country should be looking at certain things to support such projects, or just to support its infrastructure development.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's when we talk about diversity in terms of the projects, I think it's exactly that. If Kuwait is and will continue to invest in renewables, and the holy grail of renewable energy is to be able to store it. So batteries, those sorts of things, but also being able to, cover the gaps in the grid when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. That's the holy grail of renewables, to be able to answer that question. So we do have the batteries coming on. There's a lot, tremendous advances in battery technology, energy storage. It's also grid design. The grid has been designed for a very conventional supply and demand model. What the grid is being asked to handle now is, with the influx of renewables, is a much more unstable supply and demand scenario. So it needs resilience in that. And interesting you should say that, because as part of our corporate social responsibility, we fund projects that are of benefit to Kuwait. One of those was the University of Kuwait. One of their students was actually doing a study on grid stability and what we would need to do to consider. And so we saw that as a very important piece of work, and we're quite happy to fund that, as a contribution, because we do recognise that the changing landscape of supply and demand with the impact of renewables. Absolutely.
That's a wonderful thing that you just mentioned. And I'm happy always to hear institutions and companies that support the younger generations that do want to make an impact. But speaking of impact, if tomorrow somebody would call you and say, Paul, we're working on a state-of-the-art, first of its kind project in Kuwait, and we want you to be on board, what kind of project would it have to be to make you feel like I really want to give another chance to one more project?
Oh, I think purely from a self-interest point of view, I think the importance of water and the role that it plays in our lives, and it's almost it is a higher priority than the energy, the electricity.
They do say at the end of the day, we are 78% water.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe not 78% per se. But
yeah, but something, personal interest, something that's water related. I'll give you an example. In the UAE, this is going back a number of years, resilience, for when, say, we shut down, we can't supply as much. Where's the resilience in the country? Where's its critical strategic reserves in terms of water? At one stage in the UAE, there was an old aquifer that had dried out, and they were going, well, can we actually turn this into a strategic reserve? Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's those sorts of, blue sky thinking, not so much the willingness to think about these things, but is there the opportunity here in Kuwait to do something radical? And I think it's about that resilience. And given what has been our recent, situation, if the power of water plants were damaged due to the hostilities, our resilience is comes into question. So water resilience, I think, is a personal interest. That's is there something blue sky out there that we can do around that?
I like how you turned it into personal interest, because I want us to go back to you a bit with the conversation. At the end of the day, it's people who drive these initiatives and people who design these projects and who ensure ultimately that we have better lives. I have a very broad question. I don't even know why I included this here, because I think I would have a hard time asking this. But I will ask you, how different is the CEO sitting here today from the engineer who is entering this industry, making its first steps 30 years ago?
I think it's, there's always that vocational transformation. There's the old joke, I'm a manager now because I'm a failed engineer, but no, that's not quite right. But I think as you grow, you can start to put your career into context. You start out doing stuff that I like nuts and bolts and I like turbines and things like that. And then suddenly when you're doing it, you start to that realization of, what does this stuff actually mean? Not just what it does, but what does it mean? And the growing realization of, what you do becomes inherently linked to what you believe and what you, for some people, for me it does, what I do is, and that linkage has become stronger over time. Dare I say it, using the dirty word ambition, well, it's not a dirty word. I mean, ambition is that you want,
it's an important thing.
You want dreams to come true. You want your aspirations, your beliefs. And so having ambition has meant growing from someone who did stuff because it was fun playing with nuts and bolts to I'm got the opportunity to influence the outcomes, the opportunity to influence, the way the world works, even if it's just a little bit,
No, and at the end of the day, you also need a reason to get out of bed in the morning. If you're not inspired by your work, you won't feel like going to work. But I want to know, speaking of that, do you think that working on infrastructure projects that, as you say, align with your values and what you believe in has changed the way you look at responsibility and leadership?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is kind of a little bit circular that, what I believe in, how do I then influence the outcomes? So then I need because of the way I look at the world, the influence I want to have, the outcomes that I want, then I know that I need a certain level of influence to be able to make those things happen. So it becomes, self-reinforcing. I'm sorry, it's probably a very roundabout way of answering the question, but you kind of, if I want the outcome, I need to be able to be in a position to influence the outcome. And then and what I found is, for me, it's been a positive reinforcement. Being able to influence the outcome has reinforced the values that I believe in. So it makes the driver to keep making that circle of, influence outcome.
You have been moving through different markets, but I want us to look a bit at these more emerging markets specifically, and countries like Kuwait that are now building on their national visions the future of the country. Do you feel that your role weighs more in terms of the technological expertise and the way that you're able to conduct such projects? Or do you think it actually comes from how you're building the next generation and the leaders that are going to follow your footsteps, talking here about local workforce?
Oh, absolutely. And I guess it starts with a personal value, that everything I've learned, every piece of knowledge and, dare I say it, wisdom, others might debate that, but it isn't worth a tin of beans if I can't pass it on. If I can't, if I've learn't something and I can't pass it on to you, then it's of no value. It has no value. And so, I'm cautious about grand terms like legacy, but when I'm gone, hopefully a little bit of my values have rubbed off onto, the next generation. And like I say, if I can't pass on what I've learned, then everything I've learned is meaningless. Yeah.
You will leave Kuwait at some point after having spent many, many years here.
Yeah.
What would you like to be remembered for?
That I made a difference to the people. That's it's been a very much a personal mission. Like I say, when I leave here, I hope that there will be Kuwaitis who replace me, and I hope that I've put them in good stead, to replace me, and that project, if the project is successful and continues to be successful, it will be because of the people. And so if I had an ambition to say that my legacy is that this project lasted its lifetime, the best way I can do that is making sure that those who follow me will ensure that happens, and I have helped equip them to make sure that success happens.
Paul, lastly, I want to ask you, what is one thing, just one, do you still want to accomplish in your professional career?
It's a work in progress, but I want, it goes back to that, the thing that I want in leaving this role is that there is a capable, confident, competent Kuwaiti to replace me. That is career goal for me.
Wonderful. Paul, thank you so much for being part of this episode. It was a real pleasure talking to you. And I'm sure that now everybody who's been watching understands way more about what a PPP project is and what it means to work on a project that is related to critical infrastructure.
Oh, Christina, thank you so much. I mean, it's been it's been a real pleasure. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I was quite nervous coming in going, I hope I don't put my foot in my mouth. But you've made it very, very easy. I really appreciate, the warmth of the discussion and the conversation's been really meaningful. So I really thank you for that. I'm humbled. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much. To everybody who has been watching until the end, thank you so much for being with us. I hope you are left today with some new knowledge and with some perspectives for your future careers and for the future of Kuwait. For more information, don't forget to stay close. You can find us on all our social media platforms. I do want to know your opinions in the comment section. Until next time, don't forget, meet us in the middle.